Hi everyone. So today we have a special guest. She's coming in from all the way in Pakistan, and she works for the Every Woman Treaty, an organization that I actually had the opportunity to work with back as an undergrad. And this interview is filled with such great statistics and information that I hope afterwards you go ahead and sign the treaty to help make a difference in the world.
So, as you know, my name is Zainab Ali Khan, and I am from Pakistan. I am currently the Global Coalition Coordinator for Every Woman Treaty, and I'm also the founding working group member. I joined Every Woman Treaty back in 2014, and I worked for them on a voluntary basis for about 5 years. And in 2019, they asked me to join their staff. And that's when I started working for them full time, you
Wow.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I have quite a bit of experience working for the development and corporate sectors in Pakistan. I've been working here since 2003. I've worked for about 9 local and international organizations in total throughout the span of my career. And I hold a bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto and a bachelor's degree from the University of Maine and a master's degree from the University of Toronto in Women and Gender Studies. I am also a survivor of sexual assault, domestic and family violence. So this is not really work to me. It's my passion, and I see it as something that I will do for the rest of my life, fighting for the rights of women and more specifically working on curbing violence against women and girls. So that's a little bit about myself. And yeah, I've traveled quite a bit. My father is a former diplomat, and so I've lived in about 8 countries around the world. And so yeah, that's a bit about me.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think in this field, passion is the biggest part and the biggest influence with it. I think without passion, people can't get this work done. So currently, what are the global statutes and laws that protect women and children from violence?
So there are a number of regional treaties, and we have international treaties as well to protect women against violence. It would surprise you to know that 1.3 billion women around the world are raped, beaten, or assaulted at some point in their lives. We do have regional treaties. The Latin America and the Caribbean has Belém do Pará. Africa has the Maputo Protocol, and of course, Europe has the Istanbul Convention. However, all 3 of these treaties are, of course, regional treaties. The Istanbul Convention is of course, open to non-European countries to sign as well. But unfortunately, when the Istanbul Convention was being drafted, no country outside of Europe was consulted during its drafting process, with the result that now, today, non-European nations see it as a very Eurocentric document, that has a very Eurocentric way of describing women's rights. And so no country outside of Europe has signed the Istanbul Convention. Now let's come to the international treaty, which is CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. CEDAW, of course, was drafted in the 1980s, and it is a binding document when it comes to discrimination, not when it comes to violence. In fact, in the body of CEDAW, the document itself, the words violence, rape, and domestic violence are not even mentioned. Because back when CEDAW was being drafted, these issues were largely seen as private matters that did not come within the ambit of the state. Then CEDAW also has a narrative-based reporting mechanism, which means that it has no clear scorecard. So nations that do bother to submit their CEDAW reports, signatory nations of CEDAW, who do bother to submit their reports on an annual basis only report on, the violence that is going on. They're not really reporting on what measures they are taking to curb the violence against women and girls, and if those measures that they're taking and implementing are actually making a difference. Then, of course, CEDAW has two recommendations, numbers 19 and 35, that specifically deal with violence against women. These recommendations were added later on. But they are just that, they're only recommendations, which means they're soft law. They don't have the teeth to hold nations accountable. And of course, nations that signed on to CEDAW before these recommendations came into being do not feel liable to these two recommendations because they frankly didn't sign them. So yes, we do have the two recommendations. Recommendation number 35 has very strong language against violence, but it doesn't do much good when nations don't take these recommendations seriously. So these are a bit of the major, legal and implementational gaps, regarding the regional treaties and the international treaty, CEDAW, that exists today. So.
Yeah, I remember when I started working with my professor back in undergrad, researching about countries around the globe and how most of them neglected, women's rights and making sure that they were addressed and that the government actually did something about it instead of just saying it's in your marriage, it's a private factor, and then through my own studies, looking at it. And that's something that's really pushed me to want to go into this field, knowing that women don't have the same rights that I do in the United States. Yep. And that their struggles and what's done to them is just ignored because it's private, in their private life. So I know what the Every Woman Treaty is, but for those who don't, what is it and what mandates does it hope to achieve?
So the Every Woman Treaty is a coalition. It is a global coalition of 1,700 women's rights activists from 128 countries around the world, representing 843 organizations. And since 2013, we have been working on the development and the advancement of a global treaty on violence against women and girls. We've done a laborious amount of research on interventions that have been tried and tested in various development sectors around the world. These are interventions that have shown to bring down the numbers of violence against women and girls. And we like to refer to these interventions as the whole hand framework, because the interventions are 5, and then we have the PALM, which is the data and monitoring. And I'll go through each intervention with you right now. So for the treaty, we want 5 interventions. The first is legal reform, and that is the repeal of anti-women laws and the introduction of pro-women legislation. The second is training and accountability, and that would be the training and accountability of police officers, lawyers, doctors, judges, basically anybody who has to come into contact with a woman who has been violated. The third is introducing survivor support systems. As you just said, that there are many parts of the world where women are, they don't have basic rights. I'll give you the example of Pakistan, my country, where when a woman is raped, in a matter of minutes, not only has she been violated, but she also loses everything that is dear to her: her home, her family, her network, her relatives, her job, everything is gone, because there's such a social stigma attached to rape. And in these circumstances, of course, a woman needs to be able to access basic services such as shelter, because she doesn't have a roof over her head anymore. She needs to be able to access healthcare, to get a rape kit done. She needs to be able to access a police station and get a lawyer to fight her case. So these survivor support systems become absolutely imperative in these situations. The fourth intervention is prevention education, and that is starting at a very young age with boys and teaching them that, you know, violence against women and girls is not the norm and it is unacceptable, and teaching girls that they don't need to suffer in silence. And the fifth intervention is, of course, funding, and perhaps one of the most important interventions, because none of this work is possible without money. And currently, the international development assistance budget only spends 11 cents per woman for every woman who exists today to curb the effects of violence. We want a tenfold increase to that number to $1, which comes to $4 billion per year. And of course, the fifth, the palm of the hand, is the data and monitoring, the data collection on these interventions and monitoring them to see that they are making a difference. So this is a bit about the whole hand framework, and it's part of our wish list for the treaty that we're working towards.
Wow. So one thing that came to mind was when you were talking about the need for housing and healthcare. And I remember back when the pandemic started, that was a major issue, not only in the US, but throughout the globe,
Yes.
with shelters being closed down and not having access. What have you seen
Exactly.
through your research over the past year now, and how that's affected women across the globe?
Well, the situation has been dire. I mean, the attention given to the escalation of violence against women and girls during the COVID-19 pandemic has been unprecedented. Unfortunately, the violence itself has been predictable and preventable. And I think what the COVID pandemic has shown us is that whether you're part of the global south or the global north, there are basic services that are lacking in every country around the world. And of course, you know, with this pandemic, it was horrific to see what happened to women who were trying to access shelters, because the shelters were already full and they had stopped accepting more women because of the fear of the pandemic, you know. And if these proper shelters had been in place from the beginning, I think we would not have seen such an escalation of violence against women and girls would not have felt so helpless and completely deserted by their states, you know, in these situations. It's been horrific. The lockdown, I think, has really shown us that if there was any time, if there was a doubt in anybody's mind whether we need a treaty on violence against women and girls, or whether, you know, I often get this question that, oh, is violence against women and girls really such a big issue? I think that we can lay that question to rest forever now, you know,
Yes.
because across the board, we have seen an escalation. Never in the history of mankind has there been such an unprecedented escalation towards one half of humanity. And unfortunately, we've just had to stand there and just watch the disaster unfold because we were completely unprepared for it, you know, and there was no reason to be unprepared for it, because this is a violence against women and girls is not something that sprang up with the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a pandemic in itself that we have been dealing with for centuries,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah. I read an article, and they're saying how there's been such a spike because people are locked in their houses together. And so these women are locked in their houses with their abusers. And because they don't have the resources, and because they can't leave their houses, especially in certain nations where they really lock down the country, there's just been an escalation. So how can people support the treaty? What is something that civilians who don't go into this area can do?
Well, one of the things that civilians can do is that, as I told you, We are a coalition of 1,700 women's rights activists from around the world. What I would encourage your viewers to do is please log into our website, everywoman.org, and please sign the global call for a treaty. It'll only take 2 minutes of your time. It requests, the form requests very basic information. And by signing it, you become a part of our coalition. Of course, you become a part of the group, the huge group around the world that is calling for the global treaty on violence against women and girls. The other thing that viewers can do is we have our Safer Sooner report that was published, in Feb 2019, and we would really Feb 2020, we would really like, viewers to read it because it has some shocking statistics on violence against women and girls, and it makes a very strong case for why a treaty against violence against women and girls is an absolute necessity.
Yeah, no, and I encourage people who's watching this, not even if you're a woman, if you're a man or any, whatever you
Exactly.
identify as, help support this because it affects the whole globe.
Yes.
So returning to what you were just talking about, the Safer Sooner report, what were some of the findings that you saw?
Well, the Safer Sooner report makes a very strong case for a treaty on violence against women and girls. And it also discusses the legal and implementational gaps that exist within regional treaties like Belém do Pará, like the Maputo Protocol, the Istanbul Convention, and of course, international treaties such as CEDAW. It makes very clear that a global treaty on violence against women and girls will create an international standard on women's rights, and a woman's right to live a life free of violence. It'll create a global instrument that is globally applicable, and that's something we don't have right now. When it comes to violence against women and girls. It will also, treaties are known to mobilize much needed funding. And that is what the Treaty on Violence Against Women and Girls will do. We need $4 billion to make a difference, And of course, it will reduce the rates of violence. It will hold governments accountable for keeping their women citizens safe, because every government, every country that signs this treaty will be signing up to the whole hand framework that I just discussed. And we'll be able to measure them and track them because there'll be a clear scorecard to see, okay, have you just signed the treaty or have you actually implemented it? Have you actually introduced these interventions? Are you actually monitoring them? Are you collecting data on violence against women and girls? And of course, it will also support the SDG number 5, and strengthen women's movements around the globe, which is much needed at a time like this, where we've seen such a huge escalation against, when it comes to violence against women and girls. And of course, the Safer Sooner report also makes a very clear case of how violence against women and girls is a disaster in economic terms, it is a disaster in human rights terms, and in health terms. When I speak economically, when I talk about violence against women and girls, you'd be surprised to know that, it costs the world $4.7 trillion per year, 5.5% of the global economy. That is what violence against women and girls costs the world on an annual basis. As I told you, right now, the International Development Assistance budget only spends 11 cents per woman, we spend more than that on a cup of coffee every morning, you know. And when you talk, when you talk about it in economic terms, a woman who is violated, beaten up by her husband or her father or her brother or her uncle, she's unable to go to work. She loses daily wages. You know, her children are unable to go to school. So violence against a woman does not just only affect the woman, it affects her family and it affects her community as well. A woman who is violated, who is raped, may contract, from a health perspective, may contract HIV. You know, she may have to deal with an unwanted pregnancy. She may go through depression after her rape. She may even try and commit suicide, you know. And from a human rights perspective, 1 in 3 women, that's 1.3 billion women, or 35% of women who are alive today, who are beaten, raped, or assaulted at some point in their lives. I mean, chances are, Spencer, that both of us, know people who have been violated. You know, when you're in a room, chances are that definitely you will know a woman who has been violated, you know, because the figures are so high. And let me bring to your attention the fact that these are pre-COVID figures. The 1 in 3 women figure is a pre-COVID figure, you know. This is the strong case that the Safer Sooner report makes. And I would really encourage viewers to please go and read it. It's not a very text-heavy report. It has a lot of infographics. It has a lot of interesting statistics, shocking statistics that people have no idea about when they think about violence against women and girls.
Yeah, no, I definitely encourage it. It's a really interesting read. And I think there's this thought for people who don't work in this area that because a country signs a treaty, that means that they're going to adhere to it. There's nothing that's going to, without these scorecards, to be able to see, no, they're not adhering to these standards that they've signed to. And it's important to make sure that, you know, that they sign to, that they actually follow through with that and protect these women and girls. So that's
exactly. I'm sorry to cut you, Spencer,
no, you're
but
fine.
yeah, exactly what you're saying. If the treaties that had been signed in the past, such as CEDAW, for instance, actually had made a difference when it came to violence against women and girls, then why did CEDAW think that recommendations 19 and 35 were required? And even given that we have these recommendations, why did we see such a huge escalation on violence against women and girls during the lockdown? You know, if CEDAW was actually doing what it was supposed to, then why was there such a huge escalation?
Yes. So I want to give you an opportunity to have any closing remarks, anything you wanted to say in conclusion.
Sure. So in closing remarks, again, you know, it's a very sad time because I think we cannot speak about the COVID-19 pandemic without referring to the pandemic within the pandemic, which is violence against women and girls. But it's also a very hopeful time for the world because all around the world, people are demanding a change to the status quo. And this started in 2012, really, in India, when we saw the peaceful protests after India's daughter's gang rape in Delhi, which was just the most heinous act that could have been committed. And of course, we see more examples around the world. We see the Me Too movement that was started by Tarana Burke, which has now gone global. We see the Bring Back Our Girls movement in Nigeria. So people are demanding a change to the status quo. And the COVID-19 lockdown has shown us that a treaty is really the only way of ending violence against women and girls, because obviously nothing else has worked, you know, and we have to act now. We have to act now. We have to keep fighting for this treaty, because if we don't, millions of women and girls are going to die.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for, coming on and, enlightening us on all this information. I think it's important to discuss it. I know it's a topic that many people don't enjoy discussing, but it needs to be talked about. And that is what this treaty is doing. It's bringing attention to it. So thank you again. And I can't wait to see what happens with the Every Woman Treaty coming in the future and everything with what you're
Thank
doing
you.
over there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Spencer. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.